Thanks so much for joining us for another edition of our Open Mic program. As promised, we do have Congressman Rick Crawford with us right now. And Congressman, a big day last Wednesday for sure. 100,000 protesters in our D.C. in the Capitol protesting the election results, and more so of just bringing to light that they would like for an investigation. And unfortunately, there was some that broke through, and the media has been pushed back because they called it a coup, and that is not what the AP handbook called it. That is no coup. Tell us in your eyes what happened last Wednesday.
Well, I mean, there was a big number of misguided individuals who thought it would be a good idea to defile the Capitol. I mean, that's just basically what it was. And I really don't care what your political identity is, what your political persuasion. That's never okay. I mean, that was an assault on our republic, and so it should be condemned. The investigation will help us determine who was involved. There have already been several arrests. Unfortunately, I can't think of anybody anywhere, Republican or Democrat, that didn't condemn this action. So, however, to your point, let's not call it a coup, because we're opening up a can of worms here that I think is going to be, we'll regret later on if we start throwing that type of terminology around at this point in time.
When you look at this, though, a couple of hundred people broke through, which, those are rioters is what that is. This is not a peaceful protest. And to call 100,000 Americans rioters when that wasn't what was going on, that's something that needs to be addressed as well. And I think this is something that I believe we're seeing some things that I don't like as a person that believes in freedom of speech. And they say Facebook, Twitter, Amazon, these are private companies. They can delete whoever they want to. Well, that's kind of scary because they're the persons, not Washington security folks, saying we need to watch this group. They're making that call before anybody else does. And that's kind of a scary situation I see.
Well, so what's happened here is that what you have is a handful of tech companies, and you call them what you want. It's an oligopoly. I mean, these are oligarchs. They control the bulk of technology. You got the big names up there, Facebook, Amazon, Google, Twitter, and Apple. They have collectively decided that they are going to regulate speech. They are going to determine what's acceptable speech and what is not, so much so that they have engaged in either throttling or outright removal of followers on Twitter, and any number of things that you've seen over the course of the last several days that is diminishing conservatives' ability to reach their followers and be heard. Now, if this were just simply a question of a private company doing what they want to do, I'd have no problem with it. But this particular group of private companies is given special consideration under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. They are immune from liability. So they've basically given free rein to do what they want to do. They effectively have their cake and eat it too. And they are now becoming the arbiters of free speech and determining who gets to say what, when, and where. And that's something we can't stand for. And even the ACLU has come is maybe, almost never on the same side I'm on. But in this instance, they clearly see that this is a violation of the First Amendment. And so we have one company essentially attacking another. Amazon took down Parler, and because this is another problem that we have in this country, is that these companies have so much control. For example, AWS, Amazon Web Services, they were the only ones that could handle the volume that Parler was generating. And so that left Parler and their people really the only option to host their app was AWS. And then Amazon just decided, we're going to shut them down, and based that on, the terms of service, that somehow they made it look that, they violated the terms of service. So what we have here is now a company, AWS, that's prescribing terms of service that leaves them in charge of what is said and done on those servers. So that means that your email accounts aren't safe. So now you can expect to see a censoring of emails, and it'll probably start with placing emails in spam accounts and hoping that you don't catch it. Flagging emails that, and the most disturbing thing is that they're actually looking at your emails. Even a year ago, I would have never thought this. But after what they've done with Parler, it makes me think that they do have algorithms that are scanning emails and looking for verbiage that they might find unacceptable by their terms, and therefore they'll start by directing those to your spam filter, and then hopefully you don't get to see that message. But then where does it stop is my question.
That's exactly right. That's what I say as a person that believes both sides. News organizations are no longer talking down the middle, saying this is what the Republicans, this is what the Democrats. They basically had 99% negative against Trump. That's what I disagree with. Well, that is one thing. But when you delete the opposition's voice and you say, oh, they're on Parler, which is a direct competition to these other tech companies, they can delete them, and they had servers, and they all got together and said, we're going to get rid of them, not because the government said they were a threat, it's because the corporation said so. And another thing that really bothers me, Rick, when we talk about being threatened, and I do believe that President Trump has had some, he gets people riled up. He's had 50,000 people show up at these rallies, and nothing really that dramatic of people destroying stuff. So this was something that went out of control. But what I don't understand is where are they when we can look at what has been said by Democrats? So if you had Republicans, and I would be doing this if it was reversed. I would do this if I felt Republicans went after Democrats and they controlled and took people off. This is what we've heard. It begins with Madonna and ends with President-elect Biden. This is what they said.
Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
How dare he say the things he does? Of course I want to punch him in the face.
Right. You know, there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
You'll see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station. You get out and you create a crowd.
They go low, we kick them.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
The press always asks me, don't I wish I were debating him? No, I wish we were in high school. I could take him behind the gym. That's what I wish.
And what I see here is a hypocrisy. The last two is our president-elect, and the one before that, Pelosi, calling for that. This is something that I know it feels like a lot of folks are saying, wait a minute, you're taking sides. No, I believe that you got to call black and white, make it black and white. But right now, it's kind of scary, and I don't like seeing where you delete people because they don't look or act like you. That's not America. And it was told to me by my father when I remember seeing a Nazi. This is when I was up in the Chicago area, and I thought, a Nazi? That's scary. And he goes, they have just as much freedom to speak as we do. That's what America's all about. Don't mean we agree with them, but they do. But this is scary what we're seeing now, and I don't like it. And I think that we need to call people to be aware of what's going on, and that's why I appreciate you taking time and talking with us about it.
Well, the bigger problem is, if the left doesn't agree with what you say, they call you a Nazi or they call you a fascist. And then basically that's not true. But it's okay for them to level those kind of charges against people that they disagree with. If the situation were reversed, like, for example, they're socialists, they're avowed socialists, but they recoil at the idea that you're calling them socialists, even though Bernie Sanders has acknowledged that he's a socialist. AOC has acknowledged that she's a socialist. But somehow they don't want to be called socialists because they know that there's a negative connotation. It's okay, perfectly okay for them to call Republicans Nazis and fascists, even though the Nazis were the National Socialist Party. That's what they were. Conveniently forget history. That's neither here nor there. The point is that it's rules for thee, but not for me. This is what is really upsetting people. Necessarily the easiest to pin down on these kinds of things because I do what I think is the right thing to do. My position has been and will always be that whoever's in the White House, you do your best to support the president when he and possibly she within the next 2-3 months is right, and oppose them when they're wrong. And you do both of those things with respect for the office. That's been my position. I think that's what we should be as representatives, that we don't go overboard on attacking the president, even if he is of another party, and we don't go overboard on heaping praise on the president. Doesn't mean that I don't support the president as I should. Doesn't mean that I'm against the president. As I said, I support the president when he's right, oppose the president when he's wrong, and do both respectfully. That's all I'm asking for. An understanding of what the job is and what we're supposed to be doing as representatives of the district, and our constituents. I didn't swear an oath to the president or to the Republican Party. I swore an oath to the Constitution. I align with the Republicans, but my loyalties are to the Constitution. That's why I voted the way I did, because I felt like there had been a violation of the Constitution by at least 5 states. If they don't follow their own Constitution as it applies to election integrity as prescribed by the U.S. Constitution, that means they're in violation of the U.S. Constitution, and that's when I have a problem, because that diminishes the votes of states played by the rules, for example, Arkansas. And that's what this is about. And so you can make it about personalities, which the media have done. You can make it into an uglier thing, but it culminated in this assault on the Capitol, which is in effect a proxy attack on our Constitution, and it showed a remarkable lack of faith in our Constitution and our representative republic. And that's what troubles me about this the most.
When you look at this vote that you've alluded to that was going on during the riot, basically, one thing I do is see Senator Cruz. A lot of folks look at him as a constitutionalist. He's a very, very smart on that side. He could be on the Supreme Court. Many feel that years ago. And what I thought was really interesting is he said nearly 40%, like 39% of Americans feel like this is a question, the election. And he said, we need to investigate. Is that basically all you're asking at that vote?
Well, okay, so we both had a similar view on this. His deal as a senator, first you have to understand the power that an individual senator has is incredibly greater than an individual member of the House. But the two don't even compare. When he got into the fray, he did so with the express purpose, and he said this, is to try and get a commission to review these claims that some of these state legislatures had now made post-certification and take a look at this where things might have gone wrong. And I honestly believe that his goal was not to overturn the election, and it was to prevent this type of, and I'll use a kind descriptive term, to prevent these kinds of irregularities from happening again. And that is a kind way of putting it. That was my goal. My goal was, I knew going in, and most of us did know going in, we're not going to overturn the election.
That's impossible. That's impossible. That is not the federal government's place to overturn it.
That's not the point. It was never the point for me, and I communicated that clearly before I voted. My point was and is that hopefully this would lay down a marker that says to the Supreme Court, you guys should have been in this earlier, sooner, and hopefully you'll get in it now and review these cases, and we can prevent this kind of thing from happening in future elections. That was my motivation. It wasn't to overturn the election. Anybody that says anything different is plain ignorant or deliberately mischaracterizing the vote. And most of us, that was our goal. That was the reason for it, was to prevent it from happening again, not because we thought that we could overturn the election results. That was never my motivation at all. And so, anybody that felt that way was misled, but they weren't misled by me because I clearly communicated that before going in and voting the way I did. So let me say something else on the constitutionality of this. There are a lot of folks, come down on one side or the other. Well, it was unconstitutional. How can it be unconstitutional when there is specifically procedures prescribed for exactly what took place? If it were unconstitutional, there would not have been any procedure for it, and it wouldn't have gone forward. But not only is it entirely constitutional, but both houses have procedures governing exactly how to go about doing it. And so it was entirely constitutional. But this is what happens when people disagree. They fall back on, well, it's unconstitutional. Clearly it's not. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a procedure prescribed in both chambers on how to address the objection of electors. So, and it's not the first time it's ever happened. And that's the other thing, the outrage of the Democrats. They're trying to have members who voted to object to the results expelled. That's unconstitutional. That is unconstitutional. Because think about this, in 2005, there's a whole laundry list of members who are still in the House that voted against certifying George W. Bush's results. and nobody tried to expel them. And there's a reason for that, because that would be unconstitutional. And so I feel like there was never anything unconstitutional about what those of us who voted to oppose engaged in. On the contrary, it was entirely dictated by the Constitution.
It's something when you see this, so many things going on in the background, and I'm all about free speech. Okay, Facebook, if that's your platform, then people need to be aware of that, or they need to be governed and not deleting people after they spend thousands of dollars. And this has been going on for over years. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of people just deleted businesses if they said anything, and that's kind of scary. Same thing with Twitter. What's really strange about Twitter, I always said when President Trump was elected, I said Twitter should send him a thank you card, because they were going out of business before he came along, and now they delete him. So it's kind of strange.
That's the thing. That's the irony of Twitter, is that, he basically brought him to the dance. He, multi-million followers, and, he tweeted multiple times a day, and the revenue that was generated as a result of him, that it seems a little more than just duplicitous that they would take the position that they're taking. But you know what? You got to hit these people in the pocketbook before they'll, come to terms with it. And I suspect that what's going to happen, as you've seen with their stock prices in sharp decline, I suspect that they may regret that decision at some point in the future. But the reality is, I think people who are concerned about free speech need to think about the platforms on which they engage in free speech. And clearly, Twitter and Facebook have demonstrated they are not in favor of free speech. In fact, and I will tell you this, we got off of Facebook years ago. As my official office and my campaign, we no longer use Facebook. And when we did that, it stirred up a minor furor among the tech people, because they were like, the tech political class were like, oh, well, he'll never get reelected again. You got to have Facebook to get reelected. Not only did I get reelected 3 times, my margins went up every time. So the myth that Facebook can control political outcomes, at least at this level, were proven wrong. Now, Facebook may decide that they're going to go all in to defeat me, and that could be a problem. I don't know. But as it applies to my ability to communicate with constituents, we took an alternate platform, and it's worked very well for us. And that is we embedded text messaging in our website to allow direct communication with our constituents. And that's worked very, very well. So I've been encouraging members to do the same thing. And the reason for it is because we saw years ago what a problem Facebook was going to be by trying to effectively govern speech. And I don't want any part of that. I saw that years ago. That's why we got off of it. Facebook is a cesspool. It's, in my opinion, the scourge of humanity. It's the worst thing to happen to social discourse in our history. It has ruined interpersonal relationships. It has caused lifelong friends to part ways because of the way people speak and address that. Everybody is so confrontational, keyboard warriors on Facebook. You would never have said those things to an individual in person, because deep down, there was at least in most of us, there was at least somewhat of a filter in the way that we spoke to our fellow man. That's gone. And so it has manifested in a total degradation of interaction between human beings. And I hold Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg directly responsible for that. That's why I'm against Facebook. Everything good that could have come from Facebook, for all of the school districts that use it to communicate to their parents and students, for all of the neighborhoods that use it as a platform to share information about what's going on in a neighborhood, for all of the Amber Alerts and the Silver Alerts and the things that are issued on Facebook, it's outweighed by all of the evil that resides on that platform. And so I think as a society, we need to rethink our personal investment in these social media platforms and rethink about how we engage and interact with our fellow man, because it has turned us into a culture that is hard to recognize.
When you look at the impeachment proceedings that Congresswoman Pelosi put forth and is working with Senator Schumer, do you think the President-elect Biden, who wants to be the unifier, he wants to be for everyone, will he squelch this?
If he had any intention of it, he would have already done it. He would have already been on the phone to Pelosi and said, hey, knock this off. This isn't going to do us any good. It's not going to help anybody. And in fact, his silence indicates that he's supporting it, and there's a reason he's supporting it. He has no desire to unify the country. What he has the desire to is to consolidate power under him and diminish Trump in every way possible. Now, look, I'm not here as a Trump apologist. As a practical matter, it's clear what this impeachment is about, and it is designed to not only do political damage to Trump, but also to do political damage to Republicans who are opposed to impeachment. And in Nancy Pelosi's world, that means she's going to get everybody on record for voting against impeaching Trump and then use that as a political ad in the next cycle. So this is a political calculation. And let's be honest about it. Impeachment is a political proceeding anyway. You know, we talk about the House files the articles and argues the articles, passes the articles over to the Senate, then the Senate votes to convict. And what's the end result? So he's convicted. He's removed from office. So that's not a criminal proceeding. He's not convicted of anything. It's a political proceeding. Now, what could happen after the fact is that if he is, in fact, convicted on these articles that are brought forth by Speaker Pelosi on inciting insurrection, that means that he could then be criminally prosecuted, in federal court, potentially, for inciting insurrection. Is that what we're going to do? Does the evidence support that? I don't think. In fact, I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning from, it was an op-ed from a former D.C. Attorney General who had prosecuted cases that were based on insurrection. And he said this does not rise to that level, and there's no way he would be prosecuted in a federal court. And yet they persist. And so then the question you have to ask is, why are you insisting on doing this when folks around you, even Clyburn has tried to tamp this down and say, well, we need to hold off. And, what this is going to do is potentially disrupt President-elect Biden's first 100 days. And Trump is going to be the center of attention again. And so, if that's what they want to do, that's fine. I think this is more likely to blow up in their faces. But they're doing this purely for spite and political gain. That is the motivation. Of course, that is the governing principle that guides Pelosi anyway. It always has been. She's a very spiteful political animal, and she looks to you either get on board with me or I'll destroy you. That's how she operates.
Well, we appreciate you taking time and talking with us here in Open Mic, and who knows what's going to happen in the next 10 days.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Bob.